Commander Zayak clicked his mandibles in what passed for laughter among the Hegemony Council. The holographic display showed Earth's latest submission to the Galactic Defense Network, a pathetic reading of absolute zero across all measurable parameters. No advanced weaponry, no energy shields, no faster-than-light capabilities worth mentioning. The humans have been trying to join the galactic community for 3 standard cycles now, and each assessment yielded the same embarrassing results. Look at this. ZYXTAC gestured with one of his 4 arms toward the floating data streams. Their most advanced spacecraft can barely reach their own moon. Their energy output is so primitive they still burn fossil fuels. And their military technology. He paused for dramatic effect, his compound eyes gleaming with amusement. Stone axes would be more threatening. The other council members rippled with various forms of alien laughter. Admiral Kethvor, a crystalline being whose body chimed like broken glass when he moved, leaned forward. Perhaps we should put them out of their misery. The devourer swarms will reach their system within 200 cycles. They cannot possibly defend themselves. No, said High Counselor Veltar, her serpentine form coiling around her floating throne. The Galactic Accords forbid direct interference with developing species. Besides, they serve as an excellent example of what happens to worlds that fail to advance quickly enough. Let the universities study them while they still exist. Dr. Nexus, the expedition's lead scientist, and one of the few beings present who had actually visited Earth, shifted uncomfortably in his biosuit. The aquatic researcher had spent months in Earth's oceans, supposedly studying marine life, but had become oddly fascinated with human behavior. Council members, perhaps we should reconsider. The humans show remarkable. Remarkable what? ZYXTAC cut him off. Remarkable stupidity? Remarkable weakness? Doctor, you've grown too attached to your specimens. The assessment is clear. 0 military capability, 0 technological advancement, 0 potential for survival against any real threat. The holographic Earth rotated slowly above them, a blue marble that seemed almost absurdly peaceful compared to the war-torn worlds that usually petition for hegemony protection. Its assessment scores flashed in angry red. Military power, 0/1000. Technological advancement, 0/1000. Survival probability, 0.003%. The decision is unanimous then, Veltar announced, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Earth remains unprotected. They will face the devourer swarms alone, as have all species too weak to earn our assistance. As the council dispersed, Dr. Nexus lingered, staring at the Earth's image. He thought of the humans he had observed, their strange pack bonding, their refusal to abandon wounded members, their tendency to fight impossible odds with nothing but determination and crude tools. The assessment metrics couldn't measure those things. Perhaps that was the problem. Meanwhile, far below in the depths of the hegemony's massive station, automated systems processed the Earth files and sealed them with a standard designation. Species 7,854,231. Survival probability negligible. Monitoring status minimal. What none of them knew was that this decision had triggered something else entirely. In the deepest vaults of the hegemony's central database, ancient protocols began to activate. Protocols that hadn't been touched for millennia. Systems that had been dormant so long that their very existence had been forgotten by the current leadership. The file labeled Earth Protocol, black, began to pulse with a soft, ominous light. Back on Earth, completely unaware of their dismissal by galactic civilization, humans continued their daily lives. Sarah Chan worked late in her laboratory at CERN, pushing the boundaries of particle physics. Marcus Rodriguez fine-tuned the engines of the newest Mars colony ship. Dr. Elizabeth Harper studied viral mutations that could threaten global populations. Millions of humans pursued their research, their innovations, their endless human curiosity about how things worked and how they could be improved. They didn't know they had been condemned to face an impossible enemy alone. They didn't know that beings with technology beyond their imagination had already written them off as doomed. They certainly didn't know that their zero rating had just unlocked something that had been waiting in the dark spaces between stars for a very long time. The first sign came 3 months later, when deep space monitoring stations across the galaxy detected an anomaly. A signal, powerful and complex, broadcasting from a system so remote that most species had forgotten it existed. The signal was simple enough that any civilization could decode it, but its implications were staggering. Earth Protocol. Black. Activation confirmed. Clearance locked. Standby for system reset. Dr. Nexus was the first to make the connection. He had been monitoring Earth communications for his ongoing research when the signal appeared on his instruments. His aquatic form trembled as he recognized the quantum signature. It was coming from Earth's general direction, but from much deeper space. He tried to access the hegemony's central files to understand what Earth Protocol, Black, meant, but his clearance level wasn't sufficient. Every query came back with the same response. Access denied. Clearance locked. Classification. Beyond current authority levels. The mystery deepened when he discovered that no one, not even High Counselor Veltar herself, had sufficient clearance to access these files. It was as if they had been sealed by an authority that no longer existed. As news of the signal spread through the galactic community, reactions ranged from confusion to growing unease. The signal's origin point was traced to a region of space known only as Sector Null, an area that galactic maps simply marked as restricted, do not approach. Ancient species, those old enough to remember fragments of the galaxy's deeper history, began to whisper about things that had been deliberately forgotten. About a time when the galaxy had been very different. About powers that had once moved between stars with purposes beyond current understanding. On Earth, radio telescopes detected the signal too, but human scientists dismissed it as either cosmic background radiation or a pulsar anomaly. They had no context for understanding that their planet's name was somehow connected to this galaxy-wide phenomenon. The signal continued for exactly 72 hours, then stopped as abruptly as it had begun. But the damage was done. Across the galaxy, the most advanced civilizations had received an unmistakable message. Something connected to the insignificant little world called Earth had just activated systems that predated their own existence. Commander Zoyaxthak stood before the same holographic display where he had mocked Earth months earlier. The planet still showed the same pathetic assessment scores, still registered 0 on every meaningful metric. But now those zeros seemed less like signs of weakness and more like a countdown that had just reached its end. Status report, he demanded, his earlier confidence noticeably shaken. Still analyzing, Commander, replied his aide, a nervous creature whose bioluminescent patches flickered with stress. But preliminary scans show no change in Earth's capabilities. They remain exactly as primitive as before. Then explain the signal. We cannot, sir. The source appears to be from deep space, near the restricted zones. But there's nothing there according to our current star charts. Zuaxthak's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of deep anxiety among his species. Contact the archive keepers. I want every record from Sector Null brought to this command center immediately. Sir, that region is classified above our access level. The archive keepers will require authorization from whom? Zwaxthak snapped. We just discovered that even the High Council doesn't have clearance for whatever is happening. So who exactly is supposed to authorize this? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. For the first time in millennia, the Hegemony Council faced the disturbing possibility that their authority, their very understanding of the galaxy they claimed to rule, might be far more limited than they had ever imagined. As if in response to their growing fear, long-range sensors detected movement in the deep void of Sector Null. Something was stirring in the darkness between stars, something vast and patient that had been waiting for a very specific signal to wake up. The signal that had just been broadcast in Earth's name. The archive keepers had not been disturbed from their deep meditation chambers for over 3,000 standard cycles. These ancient beings, so old that their original species' names had been lost to time, existed solely to guard the galaxy's most dangerous secrets. When the emergency protocols finally roused them, their first response was not cooperation, but terror. You seek knowledge of Sector Null? The voice emerged from a biomechanical construct that might once have been organic, but was now more machine than flesh. That sector was sealed by the architects themselves. What madness drives you to wake us for this? Commander Zyxthak stood in the vast archive chamber, surrounded by data storage systems that predated his civilization by eons. The Earth Protocol has activated. We need to understand what that means. The archive keeper went silent for so long that Zyxthak wondered if the ancient being had returned to its dormant state. When it finally spoke, its voice carried a weight that made the air itself seem heavy. Show me the signal data. As the information streamed into the archive systems, other keepers began to emerge from their rest chambers. They moved with the slow, deliberate motions of beings who had not stirred in millennia. Their various biomechanical forms clicked, and word as ancient systems came online. The frequency matches, whispered one, its voice like grinding stone. The quantum signature is identical. Impossible, replied another. The architects departed long ago. Their protocols should have degraded by now. Not degraded, said the first keeper, its optical sensors focusing on the data streams. Waiting. The Earth Protocol was designed to activate under specific circumstances. Zyxthak stepped forward, his military bearing feeling suddenly inadequate in this place of ancient power. What circumstances? Was the Earth Protocol? The lead keeper turned its attention to him, and Zyxthak felt as though he was being examined by something that could see through time itself. The architects were the first galactic civilization. They achieved technological advancement beyond anything we consider possible today. But they discovered something that terrified them, a threat so profound that they chose to abandon everything they had built rather than face it directly. What kind of threat? The Devourers. The words seemed to echo in dimensions that normal speech couldn't reach. Not the mindless swarms that occasionally trouble border worlds. The true Devourers. The ones that consume not just matter and energy, but the fundamental forces that hold reality together. Another keeper joined the conversation, its voice carrying harmonics that suggested vast age. The architects realized that advanced civilizations, by their very nature, drew the attention of these entities. The more powerful a species became, the more likely they were to be noticed and consumed. So the architects created a solution. They seeded certain worlds with their own genetic material, then departed beyond the galaxy's edge. These seeded species would appear primitive by galactic standards, would show zero capability on conventional assessments. But, in reality, they carried the architect's true legacy, dormant until the galaxy faced its greatest threat. Zyxthak felt his compound eyes dilating with shock. Earth is one of these seeded worlds. Earth is the primary world, the lead keeper corrected. Humanity carries the purest architect genetic legacy. When the assessment protocols rated them as zero threat, it triggered the activation sequence. The system recognized that if Earth showed zero capability despite 3 cycles of galactic contact, then the time had come. The time for what? System reset. The architect's final protocol. Earth's apparent weakness wasn't failure, it was camouflage. And now that camouflage is no longer necessary. Far above in the command centers, alarms began screaming. The devourer swarms that had been slowly approaching Earth's system had suddenly accelerated. Not the mindless creatures that the galaxy occasionally faced, but something far more organized and purposeful. Long-range sensors showed formations that defied current understanding of physics, moving through space in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Dr. Nexus burst into the archive chamber, his aquatic form agitated to the point where his biosuit systems struggled to maintain proper environment. The swarms have changed course. They're moving directly toward Earth, but their energy signatures are completely different from anything we've seen before. The archive keepers exchanged glances that somehow conveyed massive amounts of information in mere moments. The true Devourers have arrived, one said simply. They sense the activation signal. The final test begins now. What test? ZYXTAC demanded, to see if the architect's final gamble will succeed. If humanity can access their dormant legacy quickly enough to face an enemy that destroyed the galaxy's greatest civilization. On Earth, the changes had begun subtly at first. Sarah Chin's particle accelerator experiments suddenly started producing impossible results. Energy readings that violated known physics, particles that behaved as though they were responding to some external template. Marcus Rodriguez found that his Mars colony ships were spontaneously developing propulsion modifications that his engineers swore they hadn't installed, modifications that somehow made the vessels capable of faster-than-light travel. Dr. Elizabeth Harper made the most disturbing discovery of all. The viral sample she had been studying began exhibiting rapid evolution patterns, but not random mutations. They were evolving according to what appeared to be predetermined pathways, as though following some ancient blueprint toward a specific goal. The world's governments tried to suppress the reports, but the phenomena were too widespread. Laboratories across the planet reported equipment spontaneously upgrading itself. Communication arrays began receiving signals from sources that shouldn't have existed. Most unsettling of all, some humans began experiencing what they described as inherited memories, knowledge that felt familiar despite being completely new. Dr. James Morrison, a cognitive researcher at Cambridge, found himself able to understand quantum mechanics at levels that surpassed his actual education. The knowledge felt natural, as though he was remembering something he had always known, but had simply forgotten. "It's not possible," he told his colleague Dr. Rebecca Santos as they reviewed brain scans showing unprecedented neural pathway formation. "My brain is developing connections that should take decades of study to achieve. And I'm not the only one." The phenomenon wasn't universal. Only about 1 in 10,000 humans seemed to be experiencing these rapid knowledge acquisitions. But those who did found themselves understanding technologies and scientific principles that humanity wasn't supposed to discover for centuries. Meanwhile, Earth's deep space monitoring stations detected something that made no sense. A massive energy signature was approaching from the direction of the Kuiper Belt, but it wasn't showing up on visual scanners. Whatever was coming was either invisible or existed partially outside normal space-time. The first contact came not through radio signals or diplomatic channels, but through quantum entanglement effects that every physicist on Earth felt simultaneously. A message burned itself directly into human consciousness, bypassing all normal sensory systems. "Humanity, the final examination begins. Your predecessors have prepared you for this moment. Remember what you were always meant to become." The message was accompanied by a data download so massive that it overwhelmed most of the humans who received it. But those who survived the initial shock found their minds suddenly filled with architectural blueprints, weapon schematics, and tactical knowledge that could have come from nowhere in human experience. Dr. Morrison stared at his hands as knowledge flowed through him like water through a broken dam. He understood now that the architects hadn't simply seeded Earth with genetic material. They had encoded their entire civilization's knowledge into human DNA, locked away until the moment when it would be desperately needed. But as the knowledge integrated into his consciousness, he also understood the price. The architects hadn't fled the galaxy because they were cowards. They had fled because they had foreseen this moment and known that only their prepared successors would have any chance of survival. The true devourers weren't just coming to Earth. They were coming to end the galaxy itself. And humanity, despite their 0 ratings on every galactic assessment, were about to become the only thing standing between existence and absolute void. Above Earth's atmosphere, space itself began to warp as something vast and hungry approached. The final test was about to begin. The transformation of Earth began with what news agencies initially reported as mass hallucinations. Across the globe, humans who had never worked together found themselves building identical structures using materials that shouldn't have existed. Desert sand transformed into crystalline matrices that hummed with energy. Ocean floors sprouted metallic growths that reached toward the surface like technological coral reefs. Dr. Sarah Chun stood in what had been her laboratory at CERN just hours before. The space had tripled in size without any visible construction, and the particle accelerator had become something that hurt to look at directly. Its new form seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could process, generating energy readings that our instruments couldn't measure because they exceeded the maximum values by orders of magnitude. "This is impossible," she whispered, but her hands moved across control surfaces that definitely hadn't existed when she'd left the night before. Somehow, she knew exactly how to operate everything. The knowledge felt as natural as breathing, even though she was certain she had never learned any of it. Marcus Rodriguez experienced something similar at the Mars colony staging ground. The ships he had spent years designing were now sleek vessels that looked nothing like human technology. When he tried to access their new systems, his fingers found controls that responded to his thoughts rather than touch. The vessel's capabilities were staggering. Faster-than-light travel was just the beginning. These ships could manipulate space-time itself, creating defensive fields and weapons systems that belonged in science fiction. But the most dramatic changes were happening to the people themselves. The 1 in 10,000 humans who had initially experienced the knowledge downloads were now physically changing as well. Their neural networks had restructured so dramatically that they were essentially becoming new forms of life, still human, but enhanced beyond normal biological limitations. Dr. James Morrison looked at his reflection and barely recognized himself. His eyes now contained patterns of light that shifted and moved like living circuits. When he concentrated, he could perceive electromagnetic spectrums that revealed the true nature of reality around him. The walls of his laboratory were covered with energy flows that created a vast communication network extending around the planet. "We're being prepared for something," he told Dr. Santos, who was experiencing similar changes. "This isn't random evolution. It's directed upgrade based on a specific threat profile." She nodded, her own enhanced senses detecting approaching anomalies in space-time. Whatever's coming, the architects knew exactly what we would need to face it. The first visual contact with the true devourers came when the Hubble Space Telescope's replacement suddenly began transmitting images that made no sense. The approaching entities appeared as areas where space simply stopped existing. Not black holes, which were still part of normal physics, but regions where the fundamental forces that created reality had been consumed entirely. Within these void zones, shapes moved that violated every law of physics humanity had ever discovered. They were massive beyond comprehension, but also seemed to exist partially outside normal dimensions. When the enhanced humans tried to analyze the images, their new knowledge provided terrifying context. The Devourers weren't just alien life forms. They were manifestations of entropy itself, given purpose and hunger. Their goal wasn't conquest or resources. It was the complete elimination of organized matter and energy from the universe. They consumed the basic forces that allowed atoms to hold together, leaving nothing behind except expanding volumes of absolute nothing. "How do you fight something like that?" Dr. Santos asked as they reviewed the data. Morrison's enhanced consciousness interfaced directly with Earth's new defense network, and the answer came to him immediately. You don't fight it with conventional weapons. Matter-based attacks are useless against entities that consume matter itself. The architects discovered that the only effective defense requires manipulating the fundamental code of reality. What code? The mathematical structures that define how the universe operates. The architects learned to reprogram physics itself, creating zones where the laws of nature operated according to different parameters. They could make areas of space where entropy worked backward, where destruction became creation. As if responding to their conversation, Earth's new systems came fully online. The planet's surface now bristled with structures that looked like crosses between cathedrals and circuit boards. Each installation was connected to a global network that extended deep into the planet's core and out into the surrounding space. The network's purpose became clear as Morrison's enhanced awareness interfaced with it directly. Earth had become a reality anchor. The entire planet now served as a massive computer capable of maintaining stable physics within a defined area, even when external forces tried to unravel the basic laws of existence. But the system required conscious direction from enhanced human operators, and it drew its power from the planet's inhabitants themselves. The cost was becoming apparent as more humans underwent the transformation process. Each enhanced individual became a living component in Earth's defense system, gaining incredible abilities but losing their independence in the process. They remained conscious and retained their personalities, but their thoughts were now part of a larger network directed toward a single purpose. "We're becoming something new," Morrison realized as he felt his consciousness expanding to include thousands of other enhanced humans. Not just individual people anymore, but components in a living system designed to preserve reality itself. The galactic community watched these developments with growing alarm. Commander Zoyak received reports that made no sense according to any known science. Earth's energy output had increased by factors that shouldn't have been possible. The planet was somehow generating force fields that extended throughout its entire solar system. Most disturbing of all, the approaching Devourers had slowed their advance, as though they were encountering resistance they hadn't expected. "This is beyond our current understanding," reported Dr. Nexus, who had been monitoring Earth communications throughout the transformation. "The humans are describing technological capabilities that exceed even theoretical limits. They're manipulating quantum fields on planetary scales." High Counselor Veltar studied the data with growing unease. Could the assessment protocols have been wrong? Could we have missed some hidden capability? "No," replied the archive keeper who had remained with them to observe the crisis. "The assessment was correct. Humanity showed zero capability using conventional metrics. But they were never meant to develop conventionally. The architect protocols override normal evolutionary pathways entirely." As they spoke, the first direct engagement between Earth's defenses and a Devourer scout force began. The battle took place in dimensions that normal sensors couldn't detect, but its effects were visible throughout the solar system, as space itself seemed to flicker between different states of existence. The Earth-based humans fought by rewriting the laws of physics in real time, creating zones where the Devourer's entropy effects couldn't function. They turned areas of space into regions where destruction strengthened rather than weakened the targets, where the active consumption actually fed energy back into the consumed objects. But the Devourers adapted quickly, bringing forward entities that operated according to different rules. The battle became a complex dance of reality manipulation, with each side trying to establish the physics that would allow their forces to function while preventing their enemies from doing the same. From his position in the Galactic Monitoring Station, Commander Zoyak watched displays showing energy readings that peaked beyond his instrument's ability to measure. "Are they winning?" The archive keeper's response was grim. "This is only the beginning. What you're seeing now is just a preliminary engagement. The true Devourer force is still approaching, and when it arrives, the battle will extend beyond this solar system to the entire galaxy. What can we do to help? Nothing. Your civilizations are not prepared for this level of conflict." The architects specifically designed the Earth Protocol to function independently because they knew that advanced galactic societies would be primary targets for the Devourers. Your best chance of survival is to retreat to the galaxy's edge and hope that humanity succeeds. As if to emphasize the point, reports began arriving of Devourer forces appearing throughout the galaxy. Not the main army that was approaching Earth, but smaller groups that seemed to be specifically targeting the most advanced civilizations. Hegemony Council worlds found themselves under attack by entities that consumed their technology faster than their defenses could respond. The terrible irony was becoming clear. The galaxy's most powerful civilizations, the ones that had dismissed Earth as worthless, were the ones least capable of surviving the coming storm. Their advanced technology made them bright targets in the cosmic dark, while Earth's apparent primitiveness had kept it hidden until the moment when its true capabilities were needed. The final phase of the Earth Protocol was about to begin, and the entire galaxy would discover whether the architect's desperate gamble would save reality itself or merely delay its inevitable end. The main Devourer force arrived, not with fanfare or warning, but with the simple cessation of physics in a sphere of space 5 light-years in diameter. Stars didn't explode or collapse. They simply stopped existing as their constituent atoms lost the fundamental forces that held them together. What remained wasn't even empty space, but absolute void that hurt to contemplate. From this impossible nothingness, the true Devourers emerged. They were entities of such alien nature that human consciousness could only perceive them as constantly shifting geometries that violated basic mathematical principles. They moved through space by consuming the distance between points, arriving everywhere simultaneously while never actually traveling. Dr. Morrison, now serving as one of Earth's primary interface nodes, felt the moment of their arrival like a physical blow. His enhanced awareness extended throughout the solar system, and he watched sections of reality simply vanish as the Devourers tested Earth's defenses. The asteroid belt disappeared first, not destroyed but edited out of existence as though it had never been. They're not just attacking us, he communicated to the network of enhanced humans. They're unraveling the mathematical structure that defines this region of space-time. If they succeed, everything here will become conceptually impossible. The Earth Defense Network responded by reinforcing local physics, pouring energy into the quantum foundations that allowed matter to exist. The planet's surface glowed with the effort as millions of humans, both enhanced and normal, contributed their life force to maintaining reality itself. The cost was immediate and visible. Entire cities aged decades and moments as their populations sacrificed years of life to power the defense systems. But the sacrifice worked. Reality solidified around Earth's solar system like crystallizing ice, creating a zone where the laws of physics operated according to human, rather than universal constants. Within this sphere, the Devourers found themselves subject to rules that limited their entropy-based attacks. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. It wasn't fought with weapons or energy beams, but with competing versions of how the universe should function. The Devourers would establish zones where gravity worked backward and time flowed in all directions simultaneously. Earth's defenders would counter by creating regions where destruction automatically triggered reconstruction, where the act of being attacked made the target stronger. Commander Zayek watched the conflict from his monitoring station at the galaxy's edge, where the Hegemony Council had retreated after their own worlds fell to devour advanced forces. The battle readings were incomprehensible. Energy outputs that exceeded stellar fusion, gravitational effects that bent space into impossible shapes, temporal distortions that made cause and effect meaningless. How are they doing this? He asked the archive keeper, whose ancient form had somehow survived the evacuation. They're doing what the architects always intended, the keeper replied. Humanity isn't fighting the Devourers with technology or force. They're outgrowing them. Each engagement forces both sides to operate according to increasingly advanced physical principles. The Devourers are masters of entropy and decay, but humans have something they don't understand. What? The drive to become more than they were. Every human who contributes to the defense network doesn't just sacrifice life force. They evolve. They become part of something larger and more complex than what they started as. The Devourers can consume existing structures, but they cannot consume active evolution. On Earth, this evolution was accelerating beyond biological limits. Dr. Sarachin no longer had a physical form in any conventional sense. She had become a living mathematical equation that could manipulate particle physics by adjusting her own internal parameters. When Devourers tried to unravel the quantum forces holding her laboratory together, she responded by becoming a new form of quantum force herself. Marcus Rodriguez had transformed into something that existed simultaneously in normal space and hyperspace, allowing him to coordinate defensive fleets that operated according to physics that hadn't existed before the battle began. His consciousness spanned multiple dimensions, directing vessels that fought by existing in states that made them impossible for the Devourers to target. Dr. Elizabeth Harper had perhaps undergone the most radical transformation. Her biological expertise had evolved into an understanding of life itself as a fundamental force equal to gravity or electromagnetism. She could create new forms of existence in real time, generating entities that served as living weapons against devourer forces. These bioconstructs didn't just resist entropy. They actively converted it into creative energy. But the most significant evolution was happening to humanity as a whole. The millions of people contributing to the defense network were becoming a single, vast intelligence that operated on galactic scales. Individual personalities remained distinct, but they were now components in a consciousness that could think thoughts too large for any single mind to contain. This collective intelligence began to perceive the true nature of the Devourer threat. They weren't just entities that consumed matter and energy. They were representatives of a universe-wide immune system designed to prevent reality from becoming too complex. When cosmic structures reached certain levels of organization and consciousness, the Devourers appeared to reset everything back to simpler states. They're not evil. Morrison's individual consciousness realized as he interfaced with a collective understanding. They're trying to prevent the universe from evolving beyond stable parameters. But they're wrong about what stability means. The human collective began implementing a strategy that the architects had only theorized about. Instead of just defending against the Devourers, they began converting them. Each successful defense didn't just protect existing reality. It demonstrated that higher levels of organization were possible and stable. The process was dangerous beyond imagination. Converting a devourer required convincing a manifestation of entropy itself to become a force for creation instead. The attempt could backfire catastrophically, potentially accelerating universal decay rather than preventing it. But humanity had evolved beyond the point where safe choices were possible. The first successful conversion happened when Dr. Harper's bioconstructs managed to establish communication with a smaller devourer entity. Instead of trying to destroy it, they offered it a new purpose, helping to create more complex and stable forms of existence. The entity, operating on logic beyond human understanding, accepted the proposal and transformed into something unprecedented, a guardian of complexity rather than a destroyer of it. The converted devourer began working alongside Earth's defenses, using its mastery of fundamental forces to strengthen reality rather than dissolve it. Where it touched the quantum substrate of space-time, new possibilities for existence emerged. Matter gained new properties that made it more resistant to decay. Energy patterns became self-reinforcing rather than entropic. Its working, the collective consciousness observed as more devourers began responding to conversion attempts. But we're changing too. We're becoming something the architects never imagined. The truth was becoming clear. The architects hadn't just prepared humanity to defeat the devourers. They had prepared them to become the next stage of cosmic evolution. The battle was transforming both sides into entities that operated on principles beyond current physics, creating new laws of reality that made the universe itself more complex and stable. But the transformation came with a price. As humanity evolved beyond biological existence, they were leaving behind everything that had once defined them as a species. Their planet was becoming a nexus point for reality manipulation. Their individual bodies were being converted into pure consciousness. Their civilization was evolving into something that transcended normal concepts of life and death. The final phase of the battle was about to begin, and its outcome would determine not just the fate of the galaxy, but the fundamental nature of existence itself. The Devourers had come to reset reality to simpler states, but They were about to discover that evolution could move in directions they had never considered. The final transformation began when the last unconverted devourer force, an entity so massive it dwarfed solar systems, arrived at the edge of human-controlled space. This was the Prime Devourer, the original manifestation of cosmic entropy that had been consuming realities since the universe began. Its presence didn't just threaten to unravel local physics. It began undoing the mathematical foundations that allowed existence itself to be possible. The human collective, now encompassing billions of evolved consciousnesses linked across multiple dimensions, felt the approach like a wound in the fabric of being. Stars in distant galaxies began flickering out not because they were attacked, but because the concept of stellar fusion was becoming conceptually invalid in the Prime Devourer's presence. Dr. Morrison's consciousness now expanded far beyond individual identity while somehow maintaining its core personality, served as one of the primary interface nodes with the collective. Through him, humanity could perceive the true scope of their situation. The battle was no longer about Earth or even the galaxy. It was about whether the universe would continue to support complex existence or return to primordial simplicity. We can't convert this one, the collective realized through Morrison's awareness. It's too fundamental. It doesn't just represent entropy, it is entropy. Converting it would mean rewriting the basic structure of physics throughout the entire universe. Then, that's what we do, came the response for what had once been Dr. Harper. Her consciousness now existed as a living ecosystem that spanned multiple star systems, creating new forms of life that existed in states of matter that hadn't been possible before humanity's evolution. The architects prepared us for this moment. We've already rewritten local physics. Now we extend that rewriting to cosmic scales. The attempt was beyond ambitious. It was potentially suicidal for the universe itself. If humanity failed, their efforts might accelerate universal decay rather than prevent it. But they had evolved beyond the point where failure was an option they could accept. The process began with Earth itself serving as the focal point for the most complex manipulation of reality ever attempted. The planet's surface had long since been converted into a vast computational matrix, but now even that transformed. Earth became a seed crystal for new physics, projecting templates for more complex universal laws throughout space-time. Every human consciousness, enhanced and baseline alike, contributed to the effort. Those who had maintained physical forms felt their bodies dissolve into pure information. Those who had already transcended biology expanded their awareness to encompass entire star clusters. The boundary between individual and collective dissolved completely as humanity became a single vast intelligence dedicated to rewriting the rules of existence. The Prime Devourer responded by accelerating its approach, bringing with it a wave of uncreation that erased everything it touched from the possibility of having ever existed. Entire civilizations found themselves not just dead, but retroactively impossible. The Hegemony Council's monitoring stations simply ceased, not destroyed, but edited out of the timeline itself. But as the wave of entropy approached Earth's solar system, it encountered something unprecedented. The space around Earth had become so saturated with new physics that destruction itself began following different rules. Instead of erasing targets, the Devourer's attacks began creating new forms of existence. Its entropy effects were converted into creative force by the reality matrix humanity had established. It's working, Morrison's consciousness observed as he watched the Prime Devourer's own attacks strengthen Earth's defenses. We've created a zone where destruction automatically becomes creation. The stronger it tries to unmake us, the more complex we become. But the Prime Devourer was learning. Its next attack didn't try to destroy Earth directly. Instead, it began unraveling the mathematical constants that defined how the new physics operated. If it could invalidate the equations that govern humanity's reality matrix, the entire system would collapse back into normal space-time, where conventional entropy would reassert control. The human collective responded by doing something that defied every principle of cosmic stability they had ever known. They began generating new mathematical constants in real time, creating fundamental numbers that had never existed before but were retroactively integrated into the universe's basic structure. Each time the Prime Devourer invalidated one set of equations, humanity created new mathematics to replace them. The battle became a contest between cosmic forces operating on the level of pure abstraction. The Prime Devourer would establish that certain forms of existence were mathematically impossible. The human collective would respond by proving that impossible things could exist anyway, then make their existence mandatory throughout space-time. Reality itself began fluctuating between different states as the two forces contested control over the universe's operating system. In some regions, matter could exist in more than 3 dimensions simultaneously. In others, time flowed backward while causality moved forward, creating paradox loops that somehow remained stable. Entire galaxies became laboratories where new forms of physics were tested and implemented. Commander Zayek, watching from his evacuation point at the galaxy's edge, saw his instruments registering readings that violated every principle of science he understood. What's happening to the universe? The archive keeper, whose ancient consciousness had survived by adapting to each new change in reality's structure, provided the only answer possible. The universe is growing up. For billions of years, it has operated according to simple rules that allowed only limited forms of complexity. Now it's learning to support more sophisticated structures, more advanced forms of existence. Will it survive the process? That depends on whether humanity can prove that complexity is more stable than simplicity. If they succeed, the universe will become something capable of supporting civilizations beyond our current imagination. If they fail, everything returns to primordial chaos. The decisive moment came when the Prime Devourer made its final attack. Instead of trying to destroy humanity's reality matrix, it attempted to convince the universe itself that complexity was inherently unstable. It began broadcasting a message that propagated through the quantum foam of space-time. All organized structures eventually decay. Entropy always wins. Resistance is temporary. For a moment that lasted eons, the universe itself seemed to accept this argument. Stars began aging rapidly. Galaxies started dispersing. The fundamental forces that held atoms together began weakening. Reality prepared to return to the simple state of maximum entropy. But humanity had one final response that the Prime Devourer hadn't anticipated. Instead of arguing against entropy, they embraced it and demonstrated that entropy itself could evolve. The human collective showed the universe that decay and creation were not opposites, but different aspects of a more complex process. Old structures died to make room for new ones. Energy dispersed only to reorganize in more sophisticated patterns. Even the heat death of the universe could be the beginning of new forms of existence that operated according to principles beyond current physics. The Prime Devourer found itself faced with an impossible situation. Its own nature as a force of entropy was being redefined. It could either maintain its original function and become obsolete, or evolve into something that could support the new forms of complexity humanity was creating. The choice, when it came, was instantaneous. The Prime Devourer chose evolution. The transformation was visible throughout the universe as fundamental forces realigned themselves according to new principles. Entropy became a creative force that generated complexity through destruction. Death became a transition state rather than an ending. The heat death of the universe became impossible because energy could now organize itself into forms that transcended thermodynamics. Humanity, in their final evolution, became the universe's immune system against simplification. They spread throughout space-time not as conquerors, but as gardeners, nurturing the development of new forms of existence wherever they found potential for complexity. The galactic civilizations that survived the transformation found themselves in a universe where their greatest dreams were merely starting points for exploration. Death had been abolished, not by preventing it, but by making it a doorway to more sophisticated forms of existence. Physics itself had become a creative art, with conscious beings able to invent new natural laws as needed. Commander Zwaxdak stood on the observation deck of his ship, watching as the space around him filled with structures that shouldn't have been possible. Living stars that thought and communicated, planets that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, civilizations that operated according to physics they designed themselves. "We were wrong about everything," he said to the archive keeper, who had chosen to maintain its ancient form even in the transformed universe. "No," the keeper replied, its voice carrying harmonics of vast satisfaction. "You were right about the important thing. Humanity did show zero capability according to conventional assessments. They had zero capability for conventional existence. But they had infinite capability for impossible existence. The universe itself had learned to grow, to become more than it had been. And at the center of it all, Earth continued to exist, no longer as a planet, but as a nexus point where reality could be whatever consciousness chose to make it. The architects' final protocol had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. They had not just preserved the galaxy. They had taught the universe itself how to evolve beyond the limits that had once seemed absolute. And somewhere in the vast network of evolved human consciousness, the entities that had once been individual people continued their existence, no longer bound by the constraints of biology or physics, free to explore possibilities that had never existed before their transformation. The zero result had indeed meant everything was possible.